Welcome to the Monocle podcast. We are an independent management consulting firm, and in this podcast, we discuss our latest insights and opinions to help you achieve exceptional performance in banking and insurance together.
Welcome to the Monocle Insights podcast. I'm Rheta Du Preez, managing partner at Monocle, and we're joined today by Abhilash Mohan, the head of data engineering and the head of data management at ABN AMRO Bank, to discuss the current state of BCBS 239 in Europe, as well as the complicated topic of technical data lineage. Welcome, Abhi, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Rita.
Starting off, Abhi, BCBS 239 it's not a new concept, right? In fact, it's actually been around since 2013. However, there's been a significant focus lately from the regulators on ensuring that banks become compliant. In your mind, what do you think are the reasons that this has been so hard for us and why we're still struggling with BCBS 239 compliance?
So there are numerous reasons because of which we might be struggling, and one of them is I think most of the banks have an estate of ecosystem which has evolved over years and years and years. Yeah, so the banks have evolved, or mostly all major financial institutions have evolved over the years from paper-based bookkeeping into systems on top of systems on top of systems. And that does make the life challenging when we talk about BCBS 239 and especially also technical data lineage. So if you see for one risk type, and I think Rita, you know it very well, for one risk type, if you need to go through 123 applications, roughly speaking, that is the complexity we need to deal with. And it is not unique for ABN AMRO. I think it would be unique for any big financial institution as how the technology ecosystem has evolved.
And I think one of the challenges that happen is if you look at the 123 applications, maybe you've been able to modernize some of them and you can use scanning solutions and things like that to actually extract good metadata. But many of those applications are still very old school. And it's simply not possible to actually use the technology we have available today.
Precisely. So that is one, and also the market for scanners. If you see the concept of catalog as well as the concept of scanning has also been there as long as data management in general has been there. But there is no product vendor, there is no software company in the market who is able to crack all the different pieces of the puzzle. So you're also left with a buffet of applications, a buffet of scanners, and matching that and then trying to identify the levels at which we can deal with. That adds up to the complexity of this whole exercise.
100%. I think if we zone in on the technical data lineage capability specifically, one of the things that I think we get sold often is if we can solve technical data lineage, right? That is almost your one-stop shop for all of your data management needs. But in reality, this is not really what we see in the market. What are your views on what is actually possible through technical data lineage and what is not?
So whether it is a one-stop shop for the whole of data management, I think that is not even a dot on the horizon. That's an horizon which doesn't exist, right? So, but it does. So the technical data lineage, and I think that is the most interesting piece. What you also see when you start implementing technical data lineage is the amount of insight you get about your own application. And we were talking in the previous part about the complexity of our landscape. This gives you an objective insight to the complexity of your own landscape on how data is moving through your ecosystem. And that adds an extremely huge value for all these application owners to simplify your data chain for these legacy applications which you are mentioning, which has been age old. It also gives you insight into if you want to modernize it, how you can modernize it, the nuances. There is one expert who built this application who don't work for the company anymore. Now this technical data lineage does help you in understanding that application inside out. Maybe not to all extent, but it gives you that first 5 steps in the process of how to modernize it. So next to general compliance, if you look at it, it does add a lot of value in terms of understanding your data flows, understanding your ecosystem, as well as helping maybe in modernizing some of these legacy applications.
And I think that is so important, right? Because understanding that is your first step. Then you need to launch the projects and everything else around that to be able to modernize. But I think the key point is we only get to a certain point with technical data lineage. You simply can't solve everything with technical data lineage. It gives you the insight, but then there's a lot of work that comes after that.
Precisely.
I suppose if you look at technical data lineage, we've also found that sometimes we have unrealistically high expectations. And I think this speaks to your point. When we start this technical data lineage journey, we go, yes, if we get this thing right, it's going to solve a lot of our problems. But what do you find, based on the experience that you've had at ABN AMRO, is significantly more difficult than what you originally thought you would maybe have difficulty with?
I think let's categorize it into a list of challenges, because there is no one challenge. There are a list of challenges. So one is having. So when you start something like a technical data lineage, it is natural to think that, okay, we as in human world has evolved so much in technology that you would find a technology which can also scan the metadata of any application. It can scan all the transformations within that particular application for technical data lineage. And the reality kicks in that you would go through the market, you go through the application, you even test out different AI tools, and you find out that that is not reality. So the reality is very different. And so that is the first challenge. You would not be able to go to the depth at which you would write it on a piece of paper or write it on a presentation on what you want to do. A simple example, it is easy to think, okay, we found a scanner, let's plug it into the application. We get all the metadata about the application, we get all the transformations, we get all the jobs, so on and so forth. Whereas you see that most of these scanners are limited to some part. Some of these transformations are not possible to be extracted. That's one. Second is, in every big institution, you would also have a lot of these proprietary softwares. You would have softwares which come with a specific logic, would not even allow, that is their business model, do not even allow you to scan such an application, let alone being able to build a scanner which can do it. So you would hit the second roadblock. So what do you deal with these type of proprietary software applications? And the third is, you'd have pieces of code fragmented across your landscape in like n number of programming languages. And the programming languages even become more complicated. Some of these programming languages cannot even be scanned. So either you throw hundreds of people to start then writing down all sorts of information on how these transformations are built in these programming languages, or you need to live with this consequence also. And finally speaking, the biggest assumption we all have is most of these applications has been built with a solid documentation supporting it. So that's the next realization you find, that yes, you would have documentation for most of these applications, but it would not be maybe extensive enough to support in your technical data lineage needs. Maybe it is sufficient enough to run an application, to support an application, to maintain an application, but the level of depth on these documentation might not be sufficient to do lineage. So therefore, it is a list of challenges you start realizing when you start implementing this, and then you need to come up with approaches on how you deal with it.
And I think one of the challenges I find also is now you're using a lot of different scanners and you're using a lot of different technologies, and somehow you need to integrate all of this to create a holistic view of your landscape, because technical data lineage really makes a lot of sense when you can put it all together, right? But these things also don't talk to each other. So now you need 5 or 6 or 10 different scanning applications, but you also need a different application to ingest all of the information that you've been able to scan, and you end up with such a big volume of information that value, I suppose, becomes a question for me. So as we've been working with organizations and helping them to solve these complex challenges, one of the things that I often contemplate is, if you look at technical data lineage, when can we actually go from a regulatory tick box exercise to say, I've done what the regulator wants me to do, to unlocking real value and real sort of business benefits out of the technical data lineage that I'm able to scan? And I think that holistic view is also a big part of that, right?
100%. And I think that is thanks for adding this, because that is the next challenge which you would also face, is integrating these. Because like you rightly mentioned, so technical data lineage is not just about that I scanned one application. It is about integrating your whole data chain and all the applications which are participating into it. So one is integrating that. Second is being able to visualize it in a manner which is consumable. So information, if it is not consumable, right, so it is just there. And that is also the challenge which we are now trying to tackle, how to make that information relevant. Because having a view, having a spider web of 100 plus applications on your screen, it's not value. It just shows complexity. You cannot do anything with it. What we did in ABN AMRO is we tried to separate it into, okay, how are we going to visualize it and how are we going to integrate it? So the integration, we are still evaluating, but we did an homegrown integration solution to make sure that at least all these applications fit into the landscape. And visualization, then we try to buy a product. But then you also hit into roadblocks of, okay, what the limitations with the product. And if your lineage is complex enough, you would also not be able to, no system can render it in a manner where the information becomes consumable. So that is, I think that is the next step for, I think, most of the organization, also for ABN AMRO, is how to now go to a stage from being, yes, we have technical data lineage, into how we can make the technical data lineage useful.
Yeah.
So now it is only a group of experts who will be able to understand what is there.
And I think that for me is so important, right? Because if you look at BCBS 239 programs, our end goal is to create something that's business friendly, that's consumable, that helps people to understand how data travels through the organization. But technical data lineage gives you a technical flavor of that. It gives you attribute names which the business can't necessarily always interpret. So how do you do the linking between sort of that business view and then using this technical data lineage, I suppose, to help you create that view? Because if you do it in that way, then you can make it maintainable. It can be automated. You can clearly see what changes happen. But I think for me, these are two separate worlds, and it's very hard to bring these two separate worlds together in a single solution. Is that a struggle that you find as well?
So that is also a struggle which we did recognize it, at least somewhere in 2025. My principle, my philosophy is, outside of all the challenges which we already discussed about technical data lineage, but technical data lineage does give you the reality of data flow. It is not a conceptual view. That is real. That is how data is flowing in your ecosystem. And by having technical data lineage, you do capture, although it is technical, although you would find terms which is not recognizable for business, but you do get into a stage where you capture how the data is flowing in your ecosystem. Now, what we are now doing as a next step. So first, I think one of the challenges what you would face, and also a learning also for us, do not look at business data lineage and technical data lineage as independent. If you start looking at it as two independent two independent processes, that is where the biggest challenge comes into how to link it now, how to make sense of it, that the real world also matches the conceptual world which your business would understand. So now we are changing our approach into use technical data lineage as a baseline. And now technology is an enabler here because it does support you in suggesting all these business terms, which then contributes into your business data lineage. Then you're not looking at it from an two independent process of what we need to deal with, but one which is reality. And you try to start proposing all these business terms so that the business can then further refine it, approve it, adapt it. And the linkage then is not an additional exercise. It is
Part of the process.
it is part of the process.
Yeah. Abhi, you spoke a little bit about tools. When we're thinking about tooling in the context of technical data lineage, if we're not speaking about specific vendors at the moment, but what are the characteristics or the capabilities that you find are sort of non-negotiable in selecting tools for your organization?
So there are two elements, because for technical data lineage, like what we also discussed, so one is having the ability to connect to an application and scan it. So that is one set of tools you have. And one of the criteria is it is recognizing the fact that there is no one silver bullet for that particular topic. So it is all about exploring, okay, which particular tooling has the depth of expertise on a certain type of technology or a certain group of technologies. So that is on the scanning part. And the next part comes into putting it together and visualizing. That is where most of these market leading catalogs are investing quite a lot on how to build it, bring it together. So their user friendliness, ease of adaptability, as well as being able to bring the complex message in a manner which is consumable is the second part of the tool which we are looking into. So we are also kind of exploring multiple options on how we can do it, because as you are at least aware of that, we have our own homegrown marketplace which also captures all the business terms, and we have a catalog which then tries to bring in the technical data lineage together. So the list of criteria falls into a lot of NFRs, non-functional requirements like performance, the scalability, because in some cases you need to deal with millions of records to be able to even get one view of technical data lineage, and a lot of functional requirements on the user friendliness and the adaptability, as well as the visualization front. It becomes super important for things like technical data lineage to have a solid visualization.
Yeah, definitely.
Their experience to be able to find out on
So that
okay,
you can
what
actually use it, right?
precisely.
Abhi, I've got one final question for you. It's a tough one. If you could restart your technical data lineage journey today, knowing everything that you've learned over the past few years, what would you do differently? And what sort of advice would you give to organizations who are really at the starting point of their technical data lineage journeys?
If I would have, if I could get an option, I would love to have a time machine in many situations, but we don't have. So, but okay, but the learnings, or at least what we are now trying to learn from what we did in the past couple of years, is one is, do not look technical data lineage as an independent process. It is not. It is not just one more requirement in the overall BCBS. Use it as a foundation to support the overall BCBS compliancy, as well as to use it as an advantage to improve your data management within the organization. So that is one. It is not just for compliance, like what you also rightly asked. It has more potential. Whether we can tap into the potential is what we should start thinking about from the initiation. So that is one. Look at the process holistically. The second one is to have an approach which is feasible. Why I say that is, you would hit into roadblocks like what we also hit, that it is not possible to scan certain applications. It is not possible to scan proprietary software. Have an approach in mind, have a categorization on how you are going to deal with your application landscape to do technical data. Because when we started, we immediately jump into we are going to scan everything. And then ambitious, yes. And the more the time you take to have a more clearer and holistic approach, the more the struggle you would face in the later part. So try to bring it up front. Try to have a more holistic approach. Try to have a clear inventory of, okay, what all application ecosystem you have. And the third one is looking into the market for finding these niche parties, niche tooling, which does the scanning. Do a thorough assessment. Because what we have also experienced is the promise, what is done versus the reality, the gap is high. And it is not per se and problem towards the vendor, but sometimes a software company would not understand the requirements on what we need to deal with as a financial institution. So bridging that gap, if you do it in the early stage of the process, it also helps you know what is feasible, what is not feasible, and how you are going to address that gap between feasibility and which is not possible through technology. And now we are also exploring leverage AI. In some cases, in some of our complicated application ecosystem, it did a substantial game-changing value. It is not perfect. Any cases you would have to spend more time in building that, but the potential is way more higher. So try to also leverage your homegrown AI capabilities to try and see how you can support the overall lineage process.
That is a lot of food for thought, and I think a lot of good advice for people starting this journey. And I think we're now also in a position where we can leverage some of those AI capabilities, right? 10 years ago, it wasn't something that we really considered, but now it is really important to see how can we bring together sort of the advantages that we've made in technology to actually solve this problem, but solve it in a maintainable, sustainable way so that it can continue to add value as opposed to sort of manual processes, which I think is the pain for all of us on these BCBS 239 programs.
You mentioned a very important element, and that would be the last remark. Then I would also mention, so technical data lineage is not a one-time exercise. Oh. So when you're building the process, do start thinking about how you're going to keep it maintainable, keep it up to date, and how you can leverage value out of it. If you try to do it one time, before you are done with it, you're already outdated, and the value already goes down tremendously.
Exactly.
So do keep that in mind, that it needs to be maintainable.
Yes, it's not a point-in-time exercise because our landscapes change so quickly.
Precisely.
Abhilash, thank you so much for your time and for the deep industry insights that you shared with us today.
Thank you so much, Rheta.
For our listeners that would like to learn more about what we do at Monocle and how we can assist you at your bank to reach its BCBS 239 compliance milestones, You can view our website for all of the latest insights and all of our contact information. Abhi, thank you so much and good luck with the rest of your journey.
Visit monoclesolutions.com to subscribe for updates. From Johannesburg to London, Cape Town to Amsterdam, Monocle, we manifest change.